The practices and beliefs we have discussed pertain to internal factors that bear on self-esteem. That is, they exist or are generated from within the individual. We will now turn to an examination of external factors, that is, factors originating in the environment. What is the role and contribution of other people? What is the potential impact of parents, teachers, managers, and the culture in which one lives? These are the questions I will address in the remainder of this program. Let's begin with the role of parents. The proper aim of parental nurturing is to prepare a child for independent survival as an adult. An infant begins in a condition of total dependency. If his or her upbringing is successful, the young man or woman will evolve out of that dependency into a self-respecting and self-responsible human being who is able to respond to the challenges of life competently and enthusiastically. It is an old and excellent adage that effective parenting consists, first, of giving a child roots to grow, and then wings to fly, the security of a firm base, and the self-confidence one day to leave it. Children do not grow up in a vacuum. They grow up in a social context. Parental behavior alone does not decide the course of a child's psychological development. Apart from the fact that sometimes the most important influence in a child's life is a teacher, or a grandparent, or a neighbor, external factors are only part of the story, never the whole. We are beings whose consciousness is volitional. So, beginning in childhood and continuing throughout our life, we make choices that have consequences for the kind of person we become and the level of self-esteem we attain. To say that parents can make it easier or harder for a child to develop healthy self-esteem is to say that parents can make it easier or harder for a young person to learn the 6 practices and make them a natural and integral part of his or her life. The 6 practices provide a standard for assessing parental policies. Do these policies encourage or discourage consciousness, self-acceptance, self-responsibility, self-assertiveness, purposefulness, and integrity? Do they raise or lower the probability that a child will learn self-esteem supporting behaviors? A child who is treated with love tends to internalize the feeling and to experience him or herself as lovable. Love is conveyed by verbal expression, nurturing actions, and the joy and pleasure we show in the sheer fact of the child's being. An effective parent can convey anger or disappointment without signaling withdrawal of love. An effective parent can teach without resorting to rejection. The value of the child as a human being is not, should not be, on trial. Love is not felt to be real when it is always tied to performance, tied to living up to mother's or father's expectations, and is withdrawn from time to time as a means of manipulating obedience and conformity. Love is not felt to be real when the child receives subtle or unsubtle messages to the effect that you are not enough. Unfortunately, many of us receive such messages. You may have potential, but you are unacceptable as you are. You need to be fixed. One day you may be enough, but not now. You will be enough only if you fulfill our expectations. I am enough does not mean I have nothing to learn and nowhere to grow to. It means I accept myself as a value as I am. We cannot build self-esteem on a foundation of I am not enough. To convey to a child you are not enough is to subvert self-esteem at the core. No child feels loved who receives such messages. A child whose thoughts and feelings are treated with acceptance tends to internalize the response and to learn self-acceptance. Acceptance is conveyed not by agreement, but by listening to and acknowledging the child's thoughts and feelings, and not by chastising, arguing, lecturing, psychologizing, or insulting. If a child is repeatedly told that he or she must not feel this, must not feel that, the child is encouraged to deny and disown feelings or emotions in order to please or placate parents. If normal expressions of excitement, anger, happiness, sexuality, longing, and fear are treated as unacceptable, or wrong, or sinful, or otherwise distasteful to parents, the child may disown and reject more and more of the self to belong, to be loved, to avoid the terror of abandonment. We do not serve a child's development by making self-repudiation the price of our love. Few attitudes of parents can be so helpful for the child's healthy development as the child's experience that his or her nature, temperament, interests, and aspirations are accepted, whether or not parents share them. It is unrealistic in the extreme to imagine that parents will enjoy or be comfortable with a child's every act of self-expression. But acceptance does not require enjoyment or comfort or agreement. A parent may be athletic, a child may not be, or the reverse. A parent may be artistic, a child may not be, or the reverse. A parent may be very social, a child may be less so, or the reverse. A parent may be competitive, a child may not be, or the reverse. If differences are accepted, self-esteem can grow. A child who receives respect from adults tends to learn self-respect. Respect is conveyed by addressing a child with the courtesy one normally extends to adults. As child psychologist Chaim Ginott used to observe, if a visiting guest accidentally spills a drink, we do not say, "Oh, you're so sloppy, what's the matter with you?" But then why do we think such statements are appropriate for our children, who are much more important to us than the visitor? Parents need to be informed. Be careful what you say to your children. They may agree with you. Before calling a child stupid or clumsy or bad or a disappointment, consider the question, is this how I want my child to experience him or herself? If a child grows up in a home where everyone deals with everyone else with natural, good-natured courtesy, he or she learns principles that apply both to self and to others. Respect of self and others feels like the normal order of things, which, properly, it is. Especially important for the nurturing of a child's self-esteem is the experience of what I have called psychological visibility. If I say or do something and you respond in a way that I perceive as congruent in terms of my own behavior, I feel seen and understood by you. For example, if I become playful and you become playful in turn, or if I express joy and you show understanding of my state, or if I express sadness and you convey empathy, or if I do something I am proud of and you smile in admiration, I feel visible. In contrast, if I say or do something and you respond in a way that makes no sense to me in terms of my own behavior, I do not feel seen and understood. If I become playful and you react as if I were being hostile, or if I express joy and you display impatience and tell me not to be silly, or if I express sadness and you accuse me of pretending, or if I do something I am proud of and you react with condemnation, I feel invisible. To feel visible to you, I do not require your agreement with what I'm doing, or feeling, or saying. We might hold different viewpoints. But if we show understanding of what the other is saying, and if our responses are congruent in terms of that, we can continue to feel visible to each other. A child has a natural desire to be seen, heard, understood, and responded to appropriately. To a self that is still forming, this need is particularly urgent. This is one of the reasons a child will look to a parent for a response after having taken some action. If a child says, unhappily, "I didn't get the part in my school play," and mother answers empathetically, "That must hurt," the child feels visible. What does a child feel if mother answers sharply, "Do you think you're always going to get what you want in life?" If a child bursts into the house, full of joy and excitement, and mother says, smiling, "You're happy today," the child feels visible. What does a child feel if mother screams, "Do you have to make so much noise? What is the matter with you?" When we convey love, appreciation, empathy, acceptance, and respect, we make a child visible. When we convey indifference, scorn, condemnation, and ridicule, we drive the child's self into the lonely underground of invisibility. If we are to love effectively, whether the object is our child, our mate, or a friend, the ability to provide the experience of visibility is essential. and in giving this experience to our child, we model a practice that he or she may learn to emulate. Loving parents concerned to support the self-esteem of their children may believe that the way to do it is with praise. But inappropriate praise can be as harmful to self-esteem as inappropriate criticism. Many years ago, I learned from Haim Ginott an important distinction, that between evaluative praise and appreciative praise. Evaluative praise does not serve a child's interests. In contrast, appreciative praise can be productive both in supporting self-esteem and in reinforcing desired behavior. To quote from Ginott's book, Teacher and Child, "In psychotherapy, a child is never told, 'You are a good little boy. You are doing great.' Judgmental praise is avoided. Why? Because it is not helpful. It creates anxiety, invites dependency, and evokes defensiveness. It is not conducive to self-reliance, self-direction, and self-control." Unquote. If we state what we like and appreciate about the child's actions and accomplishments, we remain factual and descriptive. We leave it to the child to do the evaluating. Ginott offers this example of the process. Quote, "Marcia, age 12, helped the teacher rearrange the books in the class library. The teacher avoided personal praise such as, 'You did a good job,' or 'You're a hard worker.' Instead, she described what Marcia had accomplished. 'The books are all in order now. It'll be easy for the children to find any book they want. It was a difficult job, but you did it. Thank you.' The teacher's words of recognition allowed Marcia to make her own inference. 'My teacher likes the job I did. I am a good worker.' Unquote. The more specifically targeted our praise, the more meaningful it is to the child. Praise that is generalized and abstract leaves the child wondering what exactly is being praised. It is not helpful. Not only does praise need to be specific, it needs to be commensurate with its object. Overblown or grandiose praise tends to be overwhelming and anxiety-provoking, because the child knows it does not match his or her self-perceptions. Some parents are intent on helping their children's self-esteem, but they praise globally, indiscriminately, and extravagantly. At best, this does not work. At worst, it backfires. The child feels invisible and anxious. In addition, this policy tends to produce approval addicts, children who cannot take a step without looking for praise, and who feel disvalued if it is not forthcoming. If we wish to nurture autonomy, always leave space for the child to make his or her own evaluations after we have described behavior. Leave the child free of the pressure of our judgments. Help create a context in which independent thinking can occur. As to criticism, it needs to be directed only at the child's behavior, never at the child. The principle is this: describe the behavior, describe your feelings about it, describe what you want done, if anything, and omit character assassination. No good purpose is ever served by assaulting a child's self-esteem. This is the first rule of effective criticism. We do not inspire better behavior by impugning a child's worth, intelligence, morality, character, intentions, or psychology. No one was ever made good by being informed he or she was bad. Attacks on self-esteem tend to increase the likelihood that the unwanted behavior will happen again. The child thinks, since I am bad, I will behave badly. There is perhaps nothing more important to know about children than that they need to make sense out of their experience. In effect, they need to know that the universe is rational. They need to know that human existence is knowable, predictable, and stable. On that foundation, they can build a sense of efficacy. Without it, the task is worse than difficult. Sanity in family life is one of a child's most urgent needs if healthy development is to be possible. What does sanity mean in this context? It means adults who, for the most part, say what they mean and mean what they say. It means rules that are understandable, consistent, and fair. It means not being punished today for behavior that was ignored or even rewarded yesterday. It means a home in which reality is appropriately acknowledged. It means parents who practice what they preach, who are willing to admit when they make mistakes and apologize when they know they have been unfair or unreasonable. It means parents who reward and reinforce consciousness in a child rather than discourage and penalize it. If, instead of obedience, we want cooperation from our children, if, instead of conformity, we want self-responsibility, we can achieve it in a home environment that supports the child's mind. We cannot achieve it in an environment intrinsically hostile to the exercise of mind. We want to teach our children healthy ideas and values. Ideas and values are most powerfully communicated when they are embedded into family life, rooted into the being of the parents. Regardless of what we think we're teaching, we teach what we are. We need not pretend to our children that we are perfect. We can acknowledge our struggles and admit our mistakes. The likelihood is that the self-esteem of everyone in the family will benefit. In supporting and nurturing the self-esteem of our children, we support and nurture our own. To many children, school represents a second chance, an opportunity to acquire a better sense of self and a better vision of life than was offered in their home. A teacher who projects confidence in the child's competence and goodness can be a powerful antidote to a family in which such confidence is lacking, a family in which, perhaps, the opposite perspective is conveyed. A teacher who refuses to accept a child's negative self-concept and relentlessly holds to a better view of the child's potential has the power sometimes to save a life. But for some children, school is a legally enforced incarceration at the hands of teachers who lack either the self-esteem or the training or both to do their jobs properly. These are teachers who do not inspire, but humiliate. They do not speak the language of courtesy and respect, but of ridicule and sarcasm. They do not motivate by offering values, but by evoking fear. They do not believe in the child's possibilities, they believe only in limitations. They do not light fires in minds, they extinguish them. Who cannot recall encountering at least one such teacher during one's school years? Most teachers want to make a positive contribution to the minds entrusted to their care. If they sometimes do harm, it is not by intention. And today, most are aware that one of the ways they can contribute is by nurturing the child's self-esteem. They know that children who believe in themselves and whose teachers project a positive view of their potential do better in school than children without these advantages. Indeed, of any professional group, it is teachers who have shown the greatest receptivity to the importance of self-esteem. But what nurtures self-esteem in the classroom is not self-evident. I have stressed that feel-good notions are harmful rather than helpful. Yet if one examines the proposals offered to teachers on how to raise student self-esteem, many are the kind of trivial nonsense that give self-esteem a bad name. These include praising and applauding a child for virtually everything he or she does, dismissing the importance of objective accomplishments, handing out gold stars on every possible occasion, and propounding an entitlement idea of self-esteem that leaves it divorced from both behavior and character. One of the characteristics of persons with healthy self-esteem is that they tend to assess their abilities and accomplishments realistically, neither denying nor exaggerating them. Might a student do poorly in school and yet have good self-esteem? Of course. There are any number of reasons why a particular boy or girl might not do well scholastically, from a dyslexic condition to lack of adequate challenge and stimulation. Grades are hardly a reliable indicator of a given individual's self-efficacy and self-respect. But rationally self-esteeming students do not delude themselves that they are doing well when they are doing poorly. What makes the challenge of fostering children's self-esteem particularly urgent today is that many young people arrive in school in such a condition of emotional distress that concentrating on learning can be extraordinarily difficult. Schools cannot be expected to provide solutions for all the problems in students' lives. But good schools and good teachers can make an enormous difference. As with parents, it is easier for a teacher to inspire self-esteem in students if the teacher exemplifies and models a healthy affirmative sense of self. Indeed, some research suggests that this is the primary factor in the teacher's ability to contribute to a student's self-esteem. Teachers with low self-esteem tend to be more punitive, impatient, and authoritarian. They tend to focus on the child's weaknesses rather than strengths. They inspire fearfulness and defensiveness. They encourage dependency. Teachers with low self-esteem tend to be over-dependent on the approval of others. They tend to feel that others are the source of their self-esteem. Therefore, they are hardly in a position to teach that self-esteem must be generated primarily from within. They tend to use their own approval and disapproval to manipulate students into obedience and conformity. They teach that self-esteem comes from adult and peer approval. They convey an external approach to self-esteem rather than an internal one, thereby deepening whatever self-esteem problems students already have. Children watch teachers in part to learn appropriate adult behavior. If they see ridicule and sarcasm, often they learn to use it themselves. If they hear the language of disrespect and cruelty, it tends to show up in their own verbal responses. If, in contrast, they see benevolence and an emphasis on the positive, they may learn to integrate that into their own responses. If they witness fairness, they may absorb the attitude of fairness. If they see self-esteem, they may decide it is a value worth acquiring. What a great teacher, a great parent, a great psychotherapist, and a great coach have in common is a deep belief in the potential of the person with whom they are concerned. They possess a conviction about what that person is capable of being and doing, plus the ability to transmit that conviction during their interactions. Teachers with good self-esteem are likely to understand that if they wish to nurture the self-esteem of another, they need to relate to that person from their vision of his or her worth and value, providing an experience of acceptance and respect. They know that most of us tend to underestimate our inner resources, and they keep that knowledge central in their awareness. Most of us are capable of more than we believe. When teachers remain clear about this, others can acquire this understanding from them, almost by contagion. One of the painful things about being a child is that one tends not to be taken seriously by adults. Whether one is dismissed discourteously or praised for being cute, most children are not used to having their dignity as human beings respected. So, a teacher who treats all students with courtesy and respect sends a signal to the class. You are now in an environment where different rules apply than those you may be used to. In this world, your dignity and feelings matter. In this simple way, a teacher can begin to create an environment that supports self-esteem. Sometimes a child is not fully aware of his or her assets. It is the teacher's job to facilitate that awareness. This has nothing to do with phony compliments. Every child does some things right. Every child has some assets. They must be found, identified, and nurtured. A teacher should be a prospector looking for gold. Try to think back to what it would have been like to be in a class where the teacher felt there was no more urgent task than to discover the good in you, your strengths and virtues, and to help you become more aware of them. Would that have inspired the best in you? Would that be an environment in which you were motivated to grow and learn? In every classroom, there are rules that must be respected, of course, if learning is to progress and tasks are to be accomplished. Rules can be imposed by dint of the teacher's power, or they can be explained in such a way as to engage the mind and understanding of the student. A teacher can think about rules in one of two ways. She or he can wonder, how can I make students do what needs to be done? Or he or she can wonder, how can I inspire students to want to do what needs to be done? The first orientation is necessarily adversarial and at best achieves obedience while encouraging dependency. The second orientation is benevolent and achieves cooperation, while encouraging self-responsibility. Which approach a teacher feels more comfortable with has a good deal to do with his or her own sense of efficacy as a person. If low self-esteem can impel some teachers to rigid, punitive, even sadistic behavior, it can impel others to the kind of mushy permissiveness that signals a complete absence of authority, with classroom anarchy as the result. Compassion and respect do not imply lack of firmness. A capitulation to disruptive elements in the class means abdication of the teacher's responsibilities. Competent teachers understand the need for standards of acceptable behavior, but they also understand that toughness need not and should not entail insults or responses aimed at demeaning anyone's sense of personal value. One of the characteristics of a superior teacher is mastery of this challenge. To achieve the results they want, teachers sometimes have to exercise imagination. One teacher I know solved a classroom problem by gravely asking the biggest, noisiest boy in the class, when they were alone, if he could help her by exercising his natural leadership abilities to persuade some of the others to be more orderly. The boy looked a bit disoriented, evidently not knowing how to answer, but peace quickly prevailed, and the boy responsible felt proud of himself. The frustrations, pressures, and challenges teachers face test their self-esteem, energy, and dedication every day. To preserve throughout their careers the vision with which the best of them started, to hold fast to the idea that the business they are in is that of setting minds on fire, is a heroic project. The work they are doing could not be more important, yet to do it well, they need to embody that which they wish to communicate. A teacher who does not operate at an appropriate level of consciousness cannot model living consciously for his or her students. A teacher who is not self-accepting will be unable successfully to communicate self-acceptance. A teacher who is not self-responsible will have a difficult time persuading others of the value of self-responsibility. A teacher who is afraid of self-assertiveness will not inspire its practice in others. A teacher who is not purposeful is not a good spokesperson for the practice of living purposefully. A teacher who lacks integrity will be severely limited in the ability to inspire it in others. If their goal is to nurture self-esteem in those entrusted to their care, then teachers, like parents, like psychotherapists, like all of us, need to begin by working on their own. One arena in which this can be done is the classroom itself. Just as parenting can be a spiritual discipline, a path for personal development, so can teaching. The challenges each venue presents can be turned into vehicles for personal growth. Now, I want to focus on the world of work, on the challenges to economic adaptiveness, both for individuals and organizations. In an economy in which knowledge, information, creativity, and their translation into innovation are the source of wealth and of competitive advantage, there are distinct challenges both to individuals and to organizations. To individuals, whether as employees or as self-employed professionals, the challenges include to acquire appropriate knowledge and skills and to commit oneself to a lifetime of continuous learning, which the rapid growth of knowledge makes mandatory, to work effectively with other human beings, which includes skill in written and oral communication, the ability to participate in non-adversarial relationships, understanding how to build consensus through give and take, and willingness to assume leadership and motivate co-workers when necessary. Finally, to manage and respond appropriately to change. To organizations, the challenges include to respond to the need for a constant stream of innovation by cultivating a discipline of innovation and entrepreneurship into the mission, strategies, policies, practices, and reward system of the organization, to go beyond paying lip service to the importance of the individual by designing a culture in which initiative, creativity, self-responsibility, and contribution are fostered and rewarded, and finally, to recognize the relationship between self-esteem and performance, and to think through and implement policies that support self-esteem. This demands recognizing and responding to the individual's need for a sane, intelligible, non-contradictory environment that a mind can make sense of for learning and growth, for achievement, for being listened to and respected, and for being allowed to make responsible mistakes. Leaders do not usually ask themselves, how can we create a self-esteem supporting culture in our organization? But the best of them do ask, what can we do to stimulate innovation and creativity? How can we make this the kind of place that will attract the best people? And what can we do to earn their continuing loyalty? These questions are all different, and yet the answers to them are largely the same, or at least significantly overlap. It would be impossible to have an organization that nurtured innovation and creativity, and yet did not nurture self-esteem in some important ways. It would be impossible to have an organization that nurtured self-esteem, and yet did not stimulate innovation, creativity, excitement, and loyalty. From the point of view of the individual, it is obvious that work can be a vehicle for raising self-esteem. The 6 pillars all have clear application here. When we bring a high level of consciousness, responsibility, and so on to our tasks, self-esteem is strengthened, just as when we avoid them, self-esteem is weakened. In this section, I want to focus on self-esteem from the perspective of the organization, the kind of policies and practices that either undermine or support the self-efficacy and self-respect of people. An organization whose people operate at a high level of consciousness, self-acceptance, self-responsibility, self-assertiveness, purposefulness, and personal integrity would be an organization of extraordinarily empowered human beings. These traits are supported in an organization to the extent that the following conditions are met. People feel safe. They're secure that they will not be ridiculed, demeaned, humiliated, or punished for openness and honesty, or for admitting, I made a mistake, or for saying, I don't know, but I'll find out. People feel accepted. They're treated with courtesy, listened to, invited to express thoughts and feelings, dealt with as individuals whose dignity is important. People feel challenged. They're given assignments that excite, inspire, and test and stretch their abilities. People feel recognized. They're acknowledged for individual talents and achievements and rewarded monetarily and non-monetarily for extraordinary contributions. People receive constructive feedback. They hear how to improve performance in non-demeaning ways that stress positives rather than negatives, and that build on their strengths. People see that innovation is expected of them. Their opinions are solicited, their brainstorming is invited, and they see that the development of new and usable ideas is desired of them and welcomed. People are given easy access to information. Not only are they given the information and resources they need to do their job properly, they are given information about the wider context in which they work, the goals and progress of the company, so that they can understand how their activities relate to the organization's overall mission. People are given authority appropriate to what they are accountable for. They are encouraged to take initiative, make decisions, exercise judgment. People are given clear-cut and non-contradictory rules and guidelines. They are provided with a structure their intelligence can grasp and count on, and they know what is expected of them. People are encouraged and empowered to solve as many of their own problems as possible. People see that their rewards for successes are far greater than any penalties for failures. In too many companies, where the penalties for mistakes are much greater than the rewards for success, people are afraid to take risks or express themselves. People are encouraged and rewarded for learning. People experience congruence between an organization's mission statement and professed philosophy on the one hand, and the behavior of leaders and managers on the other. They see integrity exemplified, and they feel motivated to match what they see. People experience being treated fairly and justly. They feel the workplace is a rational universe they can trust. People are able to believe in and take pride in the value of what they produce. They perceive the results of their efforts as genuinely useful, and they perceive their work as worth doing. To the extent that these conditions are operative in an organization, it will be a place in which high self-esteem people will want to work. It will also be one in which people of more modest self-esteem will find their self-esteem raised. Now, I want to say a few words about the leader, the CEO or company president. The primary function of a leader in a business enterprise is to develop and persuasively convey a vision of what the organization is to accomplish. She or he must also inspire and empower all those who work for the organization to make an optimal contribution to the fulfillment of that vision, and to experience that in doing so, they are acting in alignment with their self-interest. So, the leader must be an inspirer and a persuader. The higher the self-esteem of the leader, the more likely it is that he or she can perform that function successfully. A mind that distrusts itself cannot inspire the best in the minds of others. Neither can leaders inspire the best in others if their primary need arising from their insecurities is to prove themselves right and others wrong. It is a fallacy to say that a great leader should be egoless. A leader needs an ego sufficiently healthy that it does not experience itself as on the line in every encounter. This, so the leader is free to be task and results-oriented, not self-aggrandizement or self-protection oriented. If degrees of self-esteem are thought of on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 representing optimal self-esteem and 1 the lowest imaginable, then is a leader who is a 5 more likely to hire a 7 or a 3? Very likely, he or she will feel more comfortable with the 3, since people often feel intimidated by others more confident than themselves. Multiply this example hundreds or thousands of times, and project the consequences for a business. Leaders often do not fully recognize the extent to which who they are affects virtually every aspect of their organization. They do not appreciate the extent to which they are role models. Their smallest bits of behavior are noted and absorbed by those around them, not necessarily consciously, and reflected via those they influence throughout the entire organization. If a leader has unimpeachable integrity, a standard is set that others feel drawn to follow. If a leader treats people with respect, associates, subordinates, customers, suppliers, shareholders, that tends to translate into company culture. For these reasons, a person who wants to work on his or her leadership ability should work on self-esteem. Continual dedication to the 6 pillars and their daily practice is the very best training for leadership, as it is for life. The policies that support self-esteem are also the policies that make money. The policies that demean self-esteem are the policies that sooner or later cause a company to lose money. Why? Simply because when you treat people badly and disrespectfully, you cannot possibly hope to get their best. And in today's fiercely competitive, rapidly changing global economy, nothing less than their best is good enough. One way to deepen our understanding of the themes with which this program has been concerned is to look at self-esteem as it relates to and is affected by culture. Let us begin by considering the idea of self-esteem itself. It is not an idea one finds in all cultures. It emerged in the West only recently, and is still far from well understood. Self-esteem existed in human consciousness thousands of years before it emerged as an explicit idea. Now that it has emerged, the challenge is to understand it. The need for self-esteem is not cultural. The need is inherent in human nature. What is the effect of different cultures and different cultural values on self-esteem? Every society contains a network of values, beliefs, and assumptions, not all of which are named explicitly, but which nonetheless are part of the human environment. Indeed, ideas that are not identified overtly, but are held and conveyed tacitly, can be harder to call into question. This is precisely because they are absorbed by a process that largely bypasses the conscious mind. Everyone possesses what might be called a cultural unconscious, a set of implicit beliefs that reflect the knowledge, understanding, and values of a historical time and place. I do not mean there are no differences among people within a given culture in their beliefs at this level, nor do I mean that no one holds any of these beliefs consciously, or that no one challenges any of them. I mean only that at least some of these beliefs tend to reside in every psyche in a given society, and without ever being the subject of explicit awareness. Throughout human history, most societies and cultures have been dominated by the tribal mentality. This was true in primitive times, in the Middle Ages, and in socialist and some non-socialist countries in the 20th century. Japan is a contemporary example of a non-socialist nation still heavily tribal in its cultural orientation, although it may now be in the process of becoming less so. The essence of the tribal mentality is that it makes the tribe as such the supreme good and denigrates the importance of the individual. It tends to view individuals as interchangeable units and to ignore or minimize the significance of differences between one human being and another. At its extreme, it sees the individual as hardly existing except in the network of tribal relationships. The individual by him or herself is nothing. The tribal premise is intrinsically anti-self-esteem. It is a premise and an orientation that disempowers the individual as individual. Its implicit message is, you don't count. By yourself, you are nothing. Only as part of us can you be something. Thus, any society, to the extent that it is dominated by the tribal premise, is inherently unsupportive of self-esteem. In such a society, the individual is socialized to hold him or herself in low esteem relative to the group. Self-assertiveness is suppressed. Pride tends to be labeled a vice. What was so historically extraordinary about the creation of the United States of America was its conscious rejection of the tribal premise. The Declaration of Independence proclaimed the revolutionary doctrine of individual inalienable rights and asserted that the government exists for the individual, not the individual for the government. Although our political leaders have betrayed this vision many ways and many times, it still contains the essence of what the abstraction America stands for. Freedom, individualism, the right to the pursuit of happiness, self-ownership, the individual as an end in him or herself, not a means to the ends of others, not the property of family or church or state or society. At the core of the American tradition was the fact that this country was born as a frontier nation, where nothing was given and everything had to be created. Self-discipline and hard work were highly esteemed cultural values. There was a strong theme of community and mutual aid, to be sure, but not as substitutes for self-reliance and self-responsibility. Independent people helped one another when they could, but ultimately everyone was expected to carry his or her own weight. This generalized account of traditional American culture leaves out a good deal. It does not, for instance, address the institution of slavery, the treatment of black Americans as second-class citizens, or legal discrimination against women. Just the same, we can say that to the extent the American vision was actualized, it did a good deal to encourage healthy self-esteem. It encouraged human beings to believe in themselves and in their possibilities. At the same time, a culture is made of people, and people inevitably carry the past with them. Americans may have repudiated the tribal premise politically, but they or their ancestors came from countries dominated by the tribal mentality. Their history often continued to influence them culturally and psychologically. They may in some instances have come to these shores to escape religious prejudice and persecution, but many of them carried the mindset of religious authoritarianism with them. They brought old ways of thinking about race, religion, and gender into the New World. Conflicting cultural values present from the beginning continue to this day. In our present culture, pro-self-esteem forces and anti-self-esteem forces collide constantly. The 20th century witnessed a shift in cultural values in the United States, and predominantly the shift has not supported higher self-esteem, but has encouraged the opposite. Today, the American culture is a battleground between the values of self-responsibility and the values of entitlement. This is not the only cultural conflict we can see around us, but it is the one most relevant to self-esteem. It is also at the root of many of the others. We are social beings who realize our humanity fully only in the context of community. The values of our community can inspire the best in us or the worst. A culture that values mind, intellect, knowledge, and understanding promotes self-esteem. A culture that denigrates mind undermines self-esteem. A culture in which human beings are held accountable for their actions supports self-esteem. A culture in which no one is held accountable for anything breeds demoralization and self-contempt. A culture that prizes self-responsibility fosters self-esteem. A culture in which people are encouraged to see themselves as victims fosters dependency, passivity, and the mentality of entitlement. The evidence for these observations is all around us. Cultures do not encourage the questioning of their own premises. One of the meanings of living consciously has to do with one's awareness that other people's beliefs are just that, their beliefs, and not necessarily the ultimate truth. The average person tends to judge him or herself by the values prevalent in his or her social environment, as transmitted by family members, political and religious leaders, teachers, newspaper and television editorials, and popular art such as movies. These values may or may not be rational and may or may not answer to the needs of the individual. I am sometimes asked if a person cannot achieve genuine self-esteem by conforming and living up to cultural norms that he or she may never have thought about, let alone questioned, and that do not necessarily make a good deal of sense. Is not the safety and security of belonging with and to the group a form of self-esteem? Does not group validation and support lead to an experience of true self-worth? The error here is in equating any feeling of safety or comfort with self-esteem. Conformity is not self-efficacy. Popularity is not self-respect. Whatever its gratifications, a sense of belonging is not equal to trust in my mind or confidence in my ability to master the challenges of life. The fact that others esteem me is no guarantee I will esteem myself. If I live a life of unthinking routine with no challenges or crises, I may be able to evade for a while the fact that what I possess is not self-esteem, but pseudo-self-esteem. When everything is all right, everything is all right. But that is not how we determine the presence of self-esteem. Genuine self-esteem is what we feel about ourselves when everything is not all right, when we are challenged by the unexpected, when the cocoon of the group can no longer insulate us from the tasks and risks of life. At such moments, our deepest premises reveal themselves. One of the biggest lies we were ever told is that it is supposedly easy to be selfish, and that self-sacrifice takes spiritual strength. People sacrifice themselves in 1,000 ways every day. This is their tragedy. To honor the self, to honor mind, judgment, values, and convictions is the ultimate act of courage. Observe how rare it is, but it is what self-esteem asks of us. The need for self-esteem is a summons to the hero within us. This means a willingness and a will to live the 6 practices when to do so may not be easy. We may need to overcome inertia, face down fears, confront pain, or stand alone in loyalty to our own judgment, even against those we love. No matter how nurturing our environment, rationality, self-responsibility, and integrity are never automatic. They always represent an achievement. We are free to think or to avoid thinking, free to expand consciousness or to contract it, free to move toward reality or to withdraw from it. The 6 pillars all entail choice. Living consciously requires an effort. Generating and sustaining awareness is work. Every time we choose to raise the level of our consciousness, we act against inertia. In electing to think, we strive to create an island of order and clarity within ourselves. The first enemy of self-esteem we may need to overcome is laziness. Laziness is not a term we ordinarily encounter in programs on psychology. And yet, is anyone unaware that sometimes we fail ourselves for no reason other than the disinclination to generate the effort of an appropriate response? Sometimes, of course, laziness is abetted by fatigue, but not necessarily. Sometimes we are just lazy, which means that we do not challenge inertia, we do not choose to awaken. The other dragon we may need to slay is the impulse to avoid discomfort. Living consciously may obligate us to confront our fears. It may bring us into contact with unresolved pain. Self-acceptance may require that we make real to ourselves thoughts, feelings, or actions that disturb our equilibrium. It may shake up our official self-concept. Self-responsibility obliges us to face our ultimate aloneness. It demands that we relinquish fantasies of a rescuer. Self-assertiveness entails the courage to be authentic, with no guarantee of how others will respond. Living purposefully pulls us out of passivity into the demanding life of high focus. It requires that we be self-generators. Living with integrity demands that we choose our values and stand by them, whether or not this is pleasant, and whether or not others share our convictions. There are times when it demands hard choices. If one of our top priorities is to avoid discomfort, if we make this a higher value than our self-regard, then under pressure we will abandon the 6 practices precisely when we need them most. The desire to avoid discomfort is not per se a vice, but when surrendering to it blinds us to important realities and leads us away from necessary actions, it results in tragedy. Here is the basic pattern. First, we avoid what we need to look at because we do not want to feel pain. Then our avoidance produces further problems for us, which we also do not want to look at because they invoke pain. Then the new avoidance produces additional problems we do not care to examine, and so on. Layer of avoidance is piled on layer of avoidance, disowned pain on disowned pain. This is the condition of most adults. Here is the reversal of the basic pattern. First, we decide that our self-esteem and our happiness matter more than short-term discomfort or pain. We take baby steps at being more conscious, self-accepting, responsible, and so on. We notice that when we do this, we like ourselves more. This inspires us to push on and attempt to go farther. We become more truthful with ourselves and others. Self-esteem rises. We take on harder assignments. We feel a little tougher, a little more resourceful. It becomes easier to confront discomforting emotions and threatening situations. We feel we have more assets with which to cope. We become more self-assertive. We feel stronger. We are building the spiritual equivalent of a muscle. Experiencing ourselves as more powerful, we see difficulties in more realistic perspective. We may never be entirely free of fear or pain, but they have lessened immeasurably, and we are not intimidated by them. Integrity feels less threatening and more natural. If the process were entirely easy, if there was nothing hard about it at any point, if perseverance and courage were never needed, why then everyone would have good self-esteem. But a life without effort, struggle, or suffering is an infant's dream. We do not have to catastrophize fear or discomfort. We can accept them as part of life, face them, and deal with them as best we can, and keep moving in the direction of our best possibilities. But always will is needed. Perseverance is needed. Courage is needed. The energy for this commitment can only come from the love we have for our own life. This love is the beginning of virtue. It is a launching pad for our highest and noblest aspirations. It is the motive power that drives the 6 pillars. It is the 7th pillar of self-esteem.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.